Okay, it's time now for the pressing stage. It's really the pressing and drying stage. Um, I have the stamps that have been soaked off paper. Here I have a couple sheets of paper, just 2 sheets of paper on the table. And I'm going to separate the 2 sheets of paper with the stamps in between. Some of the stamps will stick to the top piece of paper, some will stick to the bottom. And all I'm going to do is just peel these off carefully and set them on these 2 pieces of paper here. Okay. Now, when you're doing this, be very careful. The stamps are quite fragile in this stage. Uh, and again, try to keep the stamp itself flat. Okay. So I'll usually start at the edge and work my way in during this process so that I can curl the paper away from the stamps. Okay. Now, I happen to be using regular paper, regular printer paper. I would encourage everyone to use recycled paper. Normally I do, but for these videos I won't. Um, but if you use recycled paper, use paper that has been through a laser jet printer, not an inkjet printer. Okay, the ink from an inkjet printer will bleed. So the dye will bleed, and then it will bleed into your stamps, and that will damage your stamps. So if you're using recycled paper, it has to come from a laser jet printer. Okay, now we get rid of that. And hopefully I'll be able to fit all of the stamps on one sheet. Typically 20-25 stamps will fit on a single sheet. Depends on the size of the stamps, of course. Okay. Now, our goal here is to get the water out of the stamps as quickly as possible. Okay. So a lot of people will just pack this up and leave them to dry overnight. That results in some wrinkly stamps. Okay, so in my process, we actually remove the water as quickly as possible, and the result is actually quite fantastic. All right, so once I've got the stamps on top of the paper here, I'm going to get another sheet of paper, lay that on top, and iron it out. Okay, be careful. You can crease a stamp when you're doing this. So if you happen to have really curly stamps, put them face down so that when you do this little pressing action here, this little ironing action, you don't crease the stamps. Okay, I'm going to put a second sheet of paper on top of that. Okay, and if I had another batch of stamps, I would lay out the stamps and repeat this process. Okay, but I'm just doing one batch for today. And I wouldn't do more than 4 batches because then you're kind of competing with time. The stamps are drying out as you're doing this process, and that gives them more opportunity to curl and wrinkle and crack. Okay, so I think 4 batches is my limit. Okay, and then once I've got all the stamps sandwiched between layers of paper, I will do a press. Right? So I'll put a big stack of paper on top. I'll put some weight on top of that, and I'll wait for 10 minutes and repeat this process. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video. I'll come back in 10 minutes and show you the next step. Okay, so about 10 minutes has passed. Now let's see what's happened with our stamps. Okay, take the weight off. I'm going to take the excess paper off. Keen observers will note I slightly offset the stack of paper from the layer that contains the stamps, so I know where the stamps begin. Okay. Usually I'll take this off and first a big chunk and then a smaller chunk. And what I'm looking for is the wrinkling of the paper because of the water. So this paper's wrinkled. And when we get to right about here, all right, right there, that paper is fairly smooth. Okay. This paper that's been wrinkled by the water, it's done. Okay, it's done its job. off it goes. So this is an expensive process in terms of paper. I'll burn through probably 40 or 50 sheets of paper per session here. You can see all the wrinkling, I think. Yeah, you can see all the wrinkling in that paper. Okay, so the paper's doing its job. The paper is wicking the moisture away from the stamps. Okay, and this is the goal. We want to dry these stamps as quickly as possible. So it's expensive in terms of paper, but the end result is that the stamps come off. The stamps get dry very quickly. Okay, and I've reached the layer of the stamps. I'm going to get a new piece of paper here. So I put down a couple of stacks of paper, and I'm just going to transfer the stamps to new paper. This, however, is probably the most dangerous part of the process. Okay, if any gum is left on the stamps, this is the time that they will stick to the paper. Okay, so some of these stamps might be stuck down, so I just shake them around a little, make sure they're loose, and then I'll transfer them. Yes, you can do this with tongs too. I just happen to have forgotten my tongs. All right. You can do this by hand. You can do this by tongs. It's probably safer to do this by hand because with the tongs, you can grab the stamp, you pull the stamp, and if some of that gum is left over and it's stuck, you might rip the stamp. Okay, so do be careful. After this stage, usually the stamps don't stick. So if they don't stick at this stage, they're just not going to stick. Okay, so of course using your fingers, you have to be a little careful not to damage the perfs of the stamps while you're at it. There we go. Okay, almost there. Oh, see, oh, that one was a little sticky, but relatively clean. All right. Oh, yeah, that was just a touch. Just had a little touch of stickiness there on that stamp. But I'll let it go. You know, if a stamp sticks, leave it alone. Okay, just cut it out and resoak it. Although this is part of a process. So if you have a stamp that sticks, typically what I'll do is I'll cut them out. I'll continue to press them, but they'll be stuck to a piece of paper. Okay, I'll continue to press them just so they don't curl up and wrinkle. And then I'll just put them through this process again. It's no big deal. All right. So all the wrinkly paper that goes. Repeat. Lay a sheet of paper down, iron it out, lay down another sheet of paper. And again, if I had more batches, I would just continue this process, build up a stack. Okay, I'll lay down the big stack of paper and I'll put some weight on top. Okay, this paper might be a little damp, so I'm just gonna set it aside, let it dry out on its own. And there we go. And then we repeat. Okay, so I will repeat this process typically 4 times. Okay, so this is the second press, and I'll have a third press and a fourth press. And with the fourth press, I'll just let it go 24 hours. Okay. And then the next day, I'll release the stamp, so to speak. They're good to go. Okay. And what you'll notice as you do each of the pressings here is that the paper will get less and less wrinkly, right? So you'll see fewer and fewer wrinkles in the paper. The stamps will get flatter and flatter. And when you reach a point that you don't see any wrinkles in the paper, you're done. But I would still let them press for another 24 hours. The stamps will be still a little bit damp. Even though you don't see any wrinkling in the paper, the stamps will be a little bit damp. And so if you just leave them out in the open, they may tend to curl a bit on you. Okay, so I just press them for 24 hours and they're good to go. And we'll have to wait I didn't prepare any stamps ahead of time for the video, but I'll show you what they look like 24 hours from now. All right.